Good evening. Thank you for joining us tonight. Interesting week in the news. Let's start off with something that's prophecy. This one says this article, 8 extremely unusual events that will happen during the month of April. So as we enter April, there's so much anticipation in the air, and it isn't just because of the great American eclipse on April 8th. I've heard from so many people that feel like something really big is about to happen. It is almost as if we are all holding our breath and we're waiting for the next shoe to drop. Chaos is threatening to erupt all over the globe, and meanwhile, signs in the heavens are literally screaming at us to pay attention. 8 extremely unusual events that will happen during the month of April. Let me review them for you. Number 1, the Devil Comet, I've told you about this before, has become visible to the naked eye in the northern hemisphere. Number 2, the next planetary alignment takes place April 4th, 2024. It will feature 4 planets, Venus, Neptune, Saturn, and Mars. The planets will align in the morning sky. Venus, Saturn, and Mars will be visible to the naked eye. And if you really want to know a little bit more about the planets and what they stand for scripturally, biblically, I'd ask you to turn to our study in the stars, which is on YouTube. Number 3, on April 8th, the 7 other planets in our solar system, along with the sun and the moon, will appear to form a straight line in the sky when looking from Jerusalem towards the east. Very interesting. Number 4, also on April 8th, CERN is planning to fire up its Large Hadron Collider. And as they do that, actually what they're doing is they're going to shoot particles down a 17-mile-long tunnel at nearly the speed of light to recreate conditions a second after the Big Bang. It doesn't exactly sound like it's a good idea. It could actually create a black hole. Let's just hope that nothing goes wrong. Number 5, the most anticipated event of April is the Great American Eclipse of 2024. USA Today called it the astronomical event of the decade, a total eclipse of the sun, which will grace the nation's skies from Texas to Maine on the afternoon of Monday, April 8th. Number 6, as the eclipse passes over America on April 8th, NASA will be firing 3 rockets into the moon's shadow. I'm not even sure why they're doing that. Number 7, ominously, on April 8th, the Great American Eclipse of 2024 will complete a giant X over the New Madrid fault line that the Great American Eclipse began in 2017. This is a very important warning to America, by the way, which I've explained many times, and actually even in a documentary in 2017. Number 8, during the month of April, the cicada apocalypse is coming. For the first time since Thomas Jefferson was president, billions of 13-year cicadas and billions of 17-year cicadas will emerge from the ground at the same time. Billions, maybe even trillions of cicadas are going to emerge at the same time across 17 states. Brood 13 and Brood 19 have been living underground for 17 and 13 years respectively. They'll soon emerge at the same time for the first time in 221 years. The emergence of these 2 groups will overlap in central Illinois. In addition, many are speculating that a red heifer sacrifice could take place at some point during the month of April. The red heifers that were transported to Israel from the state of Texas in 2022 need to be used very soon before they're too old to qualify, and the priests that will conduct the sacrifices are ready to go. Joe Biden officially declared March 31st to be Transgender Day of Visibility. I'll talk to you a little bit more about that. Of course, many people pointed out that this was the same day that many Christians are celebrating Easter. If you can believe it, America has now more than 50 different holidays celebrating alternative lifestyles. The Biden administration's decision to honor Transgender Awareness Day on Easter Sunday has caused widespread controversy. However, many Americans may be unaware that there are more than 50 LGBTQIA25 plus themed holidays. When you add them all up, all those holidays cover a grand total of 145 calendar days, more than a third of our year. America has been fundamentally transformed, and our nation is racing in the direction it has chosen as fast as it can. This month, we will witness the most ominous signs in the heavens that our country has ever seen. It's not a coincidence. Based on our lack of morality, it's not a coincidence. Will those signs be a wake-up call, or will most of the population continue to remain asleep? Let's go a little bit further in the news. Let's talk about the New World Order. I can't get that to go back. Let's do it that way. There we go. So Canada is following China's path. Bank accounts linked to obedience scores. Our neighbors to the north are implementing a new system called open banking that will link citizens' bank accounts to a new social credit scoring system. The Justin Trudeau regime is radicalizing the nation's banking system to make it much harder for citizens to express their voices against political corruption. Just like in China, if you're seeing anything around the world, it's a lack of having a First Amendment rights, a lack of free speech. Open Banking Excellence, OBE, will incorporate social credit scores with people's banking information in Canada. Canadians will likely receive digital cash and identification in a convenient, all-in-one and inclusive place, they said. But Canada is not alone. The United Nations is unleashing its global digital compact to create a global social credit scoring system for everyone eventually. And here it comes. It's moving us towards a cashless society. OBE already operates in more than 40 different countries. This is the ideology championed by international billionaire agitator George Soros. It implies open borders, no more prisons, and out-of-control crime without punishment. All of this sustaining progressive changes in the world. How forcing Canadians and others around the world to maintain high social credit scores in order to buy and sell constitutes inclusivity and fairness remains totally unknown. There is no easier way to control the masses than to control their access to money and their ability to buy, trade, and freely move about. Does that sound familiar? If you've read Revelation, obviously it does. And so basically what we're seeing is something that's absolutely on steroids, getting us to a cashless society where you can't buy or sell unless you have some type of government mark. So we're watching Revelation just play out right in front of us. Let's go a little bit more and tell you a little bit about Israel. This one's interesting. Biden's UN betrayal of Israel is a fundamental shift in American policy. Don't believe the Biden administration's claim that it hasn't changed its stance on Israel's war on Hamas. It has. The U.S. abstention on the vote in the UN Security Council for immediate ceasefire in Gaza isn't just a routine political or diplomatic maneuver. It's a betrayal of the U.S.-Israeli alliance. The White House believes that its political interests require it to force the Jewish state to give up its goal of eliminating Hamas from the Gaza Strip. It's also handing a major victory to both Hamas and its Iranian allies. With the United Nations demanding an end to the war, there is no reason for Hamas to stop trying to hold on to those parts of Gaza that it still controls. Nor is there any reason for it to release the hostages that it still holds. That will ensure that it gets away with having committed the largest mass slaughter of Jews since the Holocaust, as well as asserting its primacy over Palestinian politics for the foreseeable future. Yet the Biden administration claimed that the resolution, which called for a cessation of fighting for the remaining 2 weeks of the Muslim holy month of Ramadan, though the world body had nothing to say about Muslims attacking the Jewish holidays like Simchat Torah, the day of October 7th, as well as the release of the hostages and the free flow of aid to Gaza, they say is non-binding. Given that Hamas has not ceased its violence and continues to hold Israeli hostages, it can be argued that Israel has a legal right to continue in this battle. But Israel's enemies around the world, at the United Nations and in the United States, aren't interested in the fine points of international law. President Joe Biden has been steadily walking away from his initial pledges of support for Israel after the October 7th massacre. The notion that Israel's counteroffensive into Gaza was over the top, as Biden mischaracterized it, let alone the big lie put forward by Hamas propagandists and their Western dupes that it was a genocide, remains contrary to the facts. Israel's efforts have been more measured than those of any other modern army faced with similar issues related to urban warfare, and resulted in historically low levels of civilian casualties relative to those enemy combatants. The international community appears to be unwilling to tolerate an Israeli victory if it means the elimination of Hamas. At the heart of this betrayal is a belief that Israel and its genocidal Islamic opponents are somehow morally equivalent. I assure you they're not. A morally serious American government would assert that any and all casualties in Gaza are the direct responsibility of Hamas, not Israel, and that the only way to save the Palestinian people from more suffering is the immediate and unconditional surrender of the terrorists. But for Biden, Vice President Kamala Harris, and the rest of the chorus of Democratic office holders and liberal media outlets clamoring for a ceasefire are not interested in Hamas's surrender. Matter of fact, not at all. But Biden and his advisor are obsessed with the idea that criticism of his early support for the war will cost him the election. That's what it's about, votes. Because left-wing activists and Arab Americans, cheered on by liberal media, think that Israel and not Hamas is the villain. So Biden and the left-wing activists are all about just getting votes, no matter what. In a world in which Hamas is allowed to win the war it started with atrocities on October 7th, is one in which no one, including Americans, should consider themselves safe from terrorism. The singling out of Israel in this manner must also be viewed as part of the surge in anti-Semitism since the war began. Jew hatred from the left has been legitimized in ways that right-wing anti-Semitism never has been. Biden's feckless behavior has created a long list of disasters, including out-of-control inflation, the rout in Afghanistan, the collapse at the border, and that led as many as 10 million illegal immigrants into our country. But by extending a lifeline to one of the planet's most vicious terrorist groups, the president set in motion a series of events that could undermine American security just as much as he is harming Israel. Biden just does not know what he's doing, or maybe he does and doesn't care. Here's another article, again about Biden. The Biden administration's war against the government of Israel. The war rages in the Gaza Strip, in northern Israel, in Lebanon, now Eilat, and on the streets of Israel's cities, as Palestinian, Lebanese, Syrian, Iraqi, and Yemeni proxies maintain and escalate their operations against the Jewish state. Unmoved by this state of affairs, listen to this, Israel's far left is reinstating the anti-government riots that occurred regularly through the first 3 quarters of 2023. You remember, Israel was in an uproar before October 7th. There were riots in the streets because of their left, just like our ultra-liberal left. As before, riots featuring bonfires along major traffic arteries, assaults on police and ultra-Orthodox Jews, threats to murder Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and storming police barricades protecting the premier's home. Before October 7th, rioters demanded the overthrow of the government due to its anti-democratic policies or its corruption. The new rallying cry is to free the hostages. On Saturday night, relatives of 10 of the 134 hostages declared, quote, "To return our loved ones, we have decided to work in the service of Hamas." How idiotic. We are demanding that the Israeli government accept the organization's demands immediately. If not, we will burn this country down. These are Israeli citizens. These are ones that have 10 hostages that are there. Obviously, if the families get their way, Hamas will demand that Israel cease to exist in exchange for the hostages. So why are the organizers putting up with this? Well, but perhaps the main one was revealed on March 17th by riot leader Ami Dror in a WhatsApp group text, where Dror told his colleagues that the White House was asking him to reinstate the riots. Let me repeat that. The White House was asking him to reinstate the riots. You need to really listen to this. This is news that you're not hearing anywhere in the prejudiced, biased media of America. The White House is sticking its hands all over Israeli politics. They're asking him to start the riots again to overthrow the Netanyahu government. Listen, based on what he referred to as a conversation with his contacts in the White House, Dror set out in granular detail the White House's four-part plan to overthrow the Israeli government. The components involved actions on the ground in Gaza, use of the UN Security Council, extortion of government ministers, and mass protests. Dror called this report an important update from the American administration. In his words, Israeli government ministers are receiving messages from American friends that they will be accused of war crimes, threats. Under our radar, the US and the EU have framed the hunger in northern Gaza as a war crime. Biden and his administration are the perpetrators of evil all over the world. As for the United Nations, listen to this, 10 days before the administration abstained from the vote for an immediate ceasefire not conditioned on the release of the hostages, Dror wrote, "The United States intends to pass a resolution in the UN Security Council that calls for immediate ceasefire in Gaza." 10 days before we did it, he already knew it because our government officials are telling him that. Dror said that the Biden administration is moving the center of gravity to Dror and its fellow riot chiefs. So far, the new protests have done more to turn the public against Dror and his comrades than against the government. Moments after the demonstration began in Tel Aviv, statements went out from hostages' families that their relatives calling for protesters to burn down the country of Israel do not represent them. The media, which has tried to represent the families of 10 out of 134 hostages as the hostages' families, were forced to acknowledge that they represented a tiny fraction of the families. You can see what's happening there. Same thing that's happening here. You have a propaganda going on in the news media, and America is behind it. Can you imagine trying to overthrow the government? It's the same thing Obama tried to do in overthrowing Netanyahu. We are really messing with fire. We need to stay out of it. Let's go a little bit further, tell you a little bit about the economy. That's right. This bridge that collapsed is going to have enormous impact on the U.S. supply chain. The Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore has collapsed. The bridge was named after the author of the text of the U.S. national anthem, the Star-Spangled Banner. Some have made a symbolic parallel between the collapse of the Francis Scott Key Bridge and the greater collapse of America that is slowly taking place. The bridge stood for freedom. Seems that it is gone. And maybe the freedom in America too. According to Bloomberg, it appears that the Port of Baltimore will be out of commission indefinitely. The Port of Baltimore is the biggest handler of U.S. imports and exports of cars and light trucks. The resulting bottleneck could accelerate a shift of goods through West Coast ports. It's a really big deal because there are over 750,000 vehicles that came through this port last year alone. It's also the largest U.S. port by volume for handling farm and construction machinery as well as agricultural products. In addition, a whole host of prominent retailers are very dependent on the Port of Baltimore. Retailers like Home Depot, Bob's Furniture, IKEA, and Amazon are just some of the companies that use the port to import goods. Other top importers include sugar and gypsum. This isn't the end of the world, and shipments can certainly be diverted to other ports, but we're talking about the 11th largest port in the entire nation, and so this will definitely be a serious blow. More than 52 million tons of foreign cargo worth some $80 billion were transported out of that port last year. In addition, it's going to take a very, very long time for this Francis Scott Key Bridge to be rebuilt. One expert is projecting that it'll take more than 2 years to rebuild the bridge. In any event, we're talking about a multifaceted crisis that is going to be affecting U.S. supply chains for the foreseeable future. Sadly, it's just the beginning. In the months ahead, U.S. supply chains will be hit with additional challenges. So if there are things you are planning to purchase, I would do that now. On a similar note, global supplies of cocoa just keep getting tighter and tighter. Cocoa prices hit a record Tuesday as supply constraints fuel prices that are higher. If you love chocolate, stock up on it right now while you can, because it's going to go through the ceiling. So many are using the term black swan event. What is that? Well, it's an unpredictable event that is beyond normal with severe consequences. They're predicting a black swan event to describe the collapse of the Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore. But the truth is that we are moving into a time when there will be one black swan event after another. So get prepared while there is still an opportunity to do so, because the months and years ahead of us are going to be extremely chaotic. Let's go a little bit further and let me tell you a little bit about religion. I mentioned it before, here it is. Biden promotes Transgender Day of Visibility on Easter Sunday. Easter Sunday. So, for all his campaign ads about passing historic legislation, President Joe Biden's most impactful legacy might be his alteration of America's spiritual life. Last week, the Biden administration prohibited children from expressing their Christian faith, declaring Easter Sunday as Transgender Day of Visibility, a children's contest celebrating its most joyful holiday while exalting a radical and harmful ideology in its place. The White House Easter egg roll asked children of service members to submit designs for Easter eggs, but not any that highlight the actual content of Easter. The contest flyer instructs children that they, quote, must not include any questionable content, religious symbols, overtly religious themes, or partisan political statements. The Biden administration's banned religious imagery alongside bigotry, racism, hatred, or harm against any group or individual who promotes discrimination based on race, gender, religion, nationality, disability, sexual orientation, or age. Are you kidding me? Easter, the Passover, Jesus resurrecting. They couldn't put anything on their eggs about that? Listen, these rules overseen by the nation's devout Catholic President stigmatizes the majority of Americans who believe in God. But what if a child's favorite activity is exclaiming Christ is risen in church on Easter morning? The Biden administration has deprived them of the opportunity to share their artistic gifts and win a prize, funded by all Americans. First Lady Jill Biden called the White House Easter egg roll a learning opportunity where we turned the South Lawn into a school community, quote unquote. The message is clear. Christian children are second-class citizens in Biden's America. As this thing goes on, it's really sickening when you think about it, and you think about what he's doing to America. Biden warned darkly that extremists are proposing hundreds of hateful laws that target and terrify transgender kids. Extremists? In reality, 72% of Americans agree that there are only two genders, male and female. 69% of Americans support legislation barring talk of gender ideology in elementary school. And 69% believe minors should not be subject to transgender hormones or surgeries. Vice President Kamala Harris gushed, on Transgender Day of Visibility, we celebrate transgender and non-binary Americans, adding, we won't stop fighting for you. One of the Catholic Church's bishops declared Joe Biden a cafeteria Catholic. I like that. In other words, he goes in and picks and chooses what he wants. Okay, so here goes. My take. You ready? I'm going to say it. My take on all this, and I'm going to say it. Joe Biden is a pagan president. Yes, he's the commander-in-chief, but it's of Satan's army. He is the leader not of the free world, but of the fallen world. So censor that. Let me give you a little bit more. Add insult to injury. Gaslighting history. The left resurrects Jesus as a Palestinian. A respected professor of Christian theology published an Easter message slamming the popular left-wing talking point describing Jesus as a Palestinian. The left will go through anything. While the claim may seem innocuous and based in ignorance, the professor ascribed deeply anti-Semitic motives to the claim. Paula Fredrickson is clearly an expert on Christian theology. An American historian published an op-ed in the Washington Post. She said, Easter marks the resurrection of Jesus, she wrote, but this year the holiday comes with a twist. Jesus resurrected as a Palestinian. Never mind that Jesus was born and died a Jew in Judea. She cites an article in the Encyclopedia Britannica describing Jewish Palestine at the time of Jesus. Fredrickson also cites the more egregious statements made by Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who last Christmas posted to Instagram a photo of a child standing in the rubble of Gaza. The photo was accompanied by an alternative history of Jesus. In the story of Christmas, she says, Christ was born in modern-day Palestine under the threat of government engaged in a massacre of innocents, she wrote. This lady is a full-blown idiot. She doesn't know anything about history. She knows even less about Christ. He was part, she said, of a targeted population being indiscriminately killed to protect an unjust leader's power. Mary and Joseph, displaced by violence and forced to flee, became refugees in Egypt with a newborn waiting to one day return home. That's not the reason why Mary and Joseph went to Egypt, or went to Bethlehem or Egypt. They went to Egypt because of Herod. They went to Bethlehem because of a census. She says this, thousands of years later, right-wing forces are violently occupying Bethlehem as similar stories unfold for today's Palestinians, Ocasio-Cortez wrote. She also made a stunning claim that the Jews today are not the descendants of the biblical nation. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is an uneducated, biased know-nothing. This high Christian holiday, she said, is about honoring the precious sanctity of a family that if the story were to unfold today would be Jewish Palestinians, AOC continued in her Christmas Day. That's interesting. So why is she such a proponent of LGBTQ that erodes the family? Professor Fredrickson dissected the premise, revealing its absurdity. After dispelling the myth of a modern Palestinian Jesus, the professor then presented the origins of the term Palestine, and I've said this before, as a 3,000-year-old Greek invention, designated 5 cities that stretched from Gaza to Lebanon. This term never applied to the heartland of Israel. Jesus, being born in Bethlehem, was a Judean Jew. The Romans called the term Syria Palestinia and applied it to the entire region after the Jewish revolt in 132 AD, almost a century after Jesus' death. It was a deliberate way to de-Judaize the territory by using the throwback term for the coastal Philistines, the professor wrote. There was no political entity called Palestine in Jesus' lifetime, Fredrickson wrote. If Jesus was born in Bethlehem, he was born in Judea as a Jew. He certainly died as one under Rome's heavy hand, the political condition that led to the two Jewish revolts. It's further an act of cultural and political appropriation and stupidity. It rips Jesus out of his Jewish context, and it rips first century Jews and 21st century Israeli Jews out of their ancestral homeland, turning them into interlopers. This is polemic masquerading as history. There have already been too many casualties since October 7th. Let's not allow history to be one of them, Professor Fredrickson concludes. Despite the claim that Jesus was a Palestinian is an obvious anachronistic myth, it is disturbingly prevalent. This narrative was adopted by left-wing activist Linda Sarsour and several times in the New York Times. This egregious perversion of history and religion is becoming mainstream in the Democratic Party. Jeremiah Wright, remember him? Who almost cost his parishioner Barack Obama the presidency in 2008 with his anti-American and anti-Semitic barbs, used the Nation of Islam podium to advance a modern-day version of the Passion in which the Jews are persecuting a Palestinian Jesus. In pushing the narrative of Jesus as a Palestinian, the media in America and politicians are advancing an extremist Palestinian talking point. At a Christmas ceremony in 2019, Dr. Mohammad Shataya, the Prime Minister of the Palestinian Authority, referred to Jesus as a Palestinian guerrilla fighter. How stupid, how idiotic, and how misinformed. We are watching the narrative change over and over again. Let me give you something else today on religion. Donald Trump's Holy Week campaign to make America pray again by promoting the God Bless America U.S. Bible. In a video posted to Trump's social media platform, Truth Social, the former president presented a King James Bible he's promoting alongside musician Lee Greenwood's, whose song God Bless the USA is often played at Trump rallies. The leather-bound Bible includes the founding American documents such as copies of the U.S. Constitution, the Bill of Rights, the Declaration of Independence, and the Pledge of Allegiance. You have to have it for your heart. You have to have it for your heart and your soul, Trump said. He also noted that religion and Christianity are the biggest things missing from this country, adding that it's the reason why the country is under such chaos. Trump contended that all Americans should own a Bible and shared that he owns many of them because it's his favorite book. This Bible is a reminder that the biggest thing we have to bring back America and make America great again is our religion, he said. In the end, we do not answer to bureaucrats in Washington, we answer to God in heaven. He concluded, Christians are under siege. We must protect content that is pro-God. We love God and we have to protect anything that is pro-God. You must defend God in the public square and not allow the media or the left-wing groups to silence, censor, or discriminate against us. In closing, Trump claimed the Founding Fathers did a tremendous thing when they built America on Judeo-Christian values, but that their foundation is under attack, perhaps as never before. And lastly, under good news, I want to give you this one. 2/3 of Americans believe Jesus physically rose from the dead. And contrary to Biden and his administration, who'll go against Christianity and rename Christian holidays, this is great news that came out this week. Survey found that 66% of Americans agree that the biblical account of the physical bodily resurrection of Jesus are completely accurate. A total of 47% of Americans say they strongly agree with this statement. Americans who attend a religious service at least once or twice a month, 95% agree. The resurrection is key to the Christian faith. For the early church, a belief in the resurrection was no mere footnote, but rather a focal point. Every Sunday was Resurrection Sunday. Jesus' resurrection is a central focus of the New Testament scriptures. With over 300 verses referencing this truth, when we study what the Bible teaches about the resurrection of Christ, we're struck by the power this singular historical event has had on the early followers of Jesus. The resurrection is underlived because it's underpreached and it's understudied by most pastors. The result, a significant percentage of churchgoers, even if it's a minority, don't believe in the resurrection. According to Lifeway data, 26% of Christians associated with mainline churches don't believe in the bodily resurrection. How can you attend a Christian church and not believe in the resurrection? I'll tell you how. You have a pastor who doesn't. You can't be a follower of Jesus if you deny the historical, physical, and bodily resurrection of Jesus Christ. The early Christians turned their world upside down because they saw Jesus after he rose from the dead. Our living hope is based on the historical, unchangeable fact of Jesus' physical and bodily resurrection from the dead. The Bible teaches us that in the resurrection of Christ, We have living hope, a better hope. No wonder why Americans are unhappy and have no hope, because they don't believe in the resurrection. Now again, it's a minority. Thank God a majority believes, and that majority may just be enough to oust Joe Biden from the White House. I pray it does.